She went in to clean and heard someone whispering from the attic, but the house was supposed to be empty. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here today. Now get comfortable, because I've got a story that's going to give you chills. Imagine this. You've been hired to clean a house that's supposed to be empty. But when you go up to the attic, you hear someone whispering, and you're all alone. Sounds creepy, right? Well, trust me, you're going to want to stay tuned for this one. By the way, if you're enjoying the stories we're sharing, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel, Stories TH, so you don't miss out on any of the spooky fun. And hey, drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is over there. I love seeing where all of you are joining in from. All right, get cozy, grab your favorite snack, and let's dive into this mysterious story. Ready? Let's go. The Unlikely Invitation. It was a chilly autumn morning when Emily checked her phone, surprised to see a message from an unknown number. She wasn't expecting anything, least of all a message from a billionaire, but that's exactly what appeared on her screen. Hello, Emily. This is Richard Winthrop. I'm reaching out because I need someone to clean my estate for the weekend. Can you help me out? Her first instinct was to question the legitimacy of the message. Richard Winthrop was a name she'd heard many times, a wealthy, reclusive business tycoon who had made his fortune in tech and real estate. He lived in one of the grandest mansions in the city, a sprawling estate nestled in the hills that many only dreamed of stepping foot inside. People like Emily, who worked as a housekeeper for middle-class families, didn't typically get involved with people like him. "Are you sure you have the right person?" Emily replied, half amused, half skeptical. The phone buzzed again, this time with a quick response. "Yes, I do. Please come by this weekend. I'll take care of the payment and you can go ahead and clean the house while I'm away. Just make sure to focus on the attic area. It's been a while since anyone's been up there." A shiver ran down her spine. The attic? Emily wasn't sure why, but something about it gave her an unsettling feeling. But then again, it was just cleaning, and the pay was more than generous, far beyond what she could have expected for a few hours of work. It was an offer she couldn't refuse. She was used to cleaning for people who were kind but unremarkable. But this was different. Richard Winthrop wasn't just rich, he was a legend. He was the type of person who bought properties that could only be described as palaces. His name was synonymous with success, and yet he chose her, a simple woman with a small, quiet life, to clean his mansion. A mix of excitement and nervousness surged through her as she agreed. The idea of spending a day in a mansion like his was thrilling, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something more was waiting for her. The morning of her arrival was crisp, the sky clear and blue, and the trees in the neighborhood painted in vibrant shades of orange and gold. Emily followed the address in her GPS, watching as the scenery grew more luxurious the further she drove. Soon, she found herself at the gates of the Winthrop estate, a massive iron structure adorned with golden accents. The grand mansion itself loomed ahead, its marble facade gleaming under the sunlight. Emily took a deep breath before stepping out of her car, her nerves tingling as she walked up the long driveway. The tall stone pillars that framed the entrance seemed to watch her every step, as if the house itself had been waiting for her arrival. A woman, an assistant or maid, Emily assumed, opened the door before she could even ring the bell. "Ms. Winthrop is waiting for you inside," the assistant said with a polite smile. "Please, follow me." The inside of the mansion was even grander than she had imagined. The marble floors reflected the shimmering chandeliers above, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. Everything was pristine and immaculately decorated, with artwork lining the walls and golden trinkets scattered throughout. Emily tried not to let the overwhelming sense of opulence get to her head. She had cleaned homes before, but nothing like this. As she followed the assistant up the grand staircase, the house grew quieter with each step. They reached the second floor, where Emily was led down a long, winding hallway. It felt as though the mansion stretched on forever, each room a mysterious world unto itself. Finally, they stopped at a large, ornate door that led into what appeared to be a storage area. "This is the attic. You'll need to clean here. It's been untouched for some time," the assistant said, her voice distant, almost as if she herself was uncomfortable in the space. Please take your time. Emily stepped inside and immediately felt the temperature drop. The attic was dimly lit, with dusty boxes stacked high on either side. The wooden beams above creaked slightly under the weight of the building. As she began to gather cleaning supplies, the silence of the room enveloped her, making her feel small, insignificant against the immense space. There was something strange about the attic, a heaviness that seemed to cling to the air, as if the house had secrets it was reluctant to share. Emily couldn't place her finger on it, but the sense of unease began to grow. She started with the windows, wiping away years of dust and grime. As she worked, she noticed an old, cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. It was out of place in the otherwise neatly packed space. Curiosity gnawed at her, and she moved toward it. Her reflection seemed distorted in the glass, as though it was trying to say something, or perhaps warn her. She shook her head, trying to dispel the thought. After all, it was just a mirror. As she turned to continue her work, a faint noise caught her attention. At first, she thought it was just the house settling, as old houses often did. But then she heard it again, whispering. It was faint, like a low murmur coming from somewhere above her. Her heart skipped a beat. No one was supposed to be here. The house was empty. Richard Winthrop was away. She could feel her pulse quicken as she looked around. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't the wind or the house creaking, it was a voice. But whose? A chill ran down her spine as she glanced toward the small, narrow doorway at the far end of the attic. She couldn't see anything, but she could feel the presence of something or someone watching her. For a moment, she stood frozen in place, trying to convince herself that it was nothing. Maybe it was just her imagination, or the old, creaky house playing tricks on her. But the whispering continued, more persistent now. Her hands trembled as she set down the dust rag, her breath shallow. "Hello?" she called out, her voice shaky. The room felt colder still. The whispering stopped abruptly. A tense silence followed. Emily's heart raced. What was going on? The attic was still. The cold silence. Emily stood frozen, her pulse thundering in her ears. The whispering had stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind an eerie silence that seemed to press in on her from all sides. The chill in the room intensified, making her breath visible in the dim light. She told herself it was nothing, just her nerves getting the best of her. But the hairs on the back of her neck refused to settle, prickling with an unease she couldn't shake. Slowly, she took a cautious step forward, her shoes making a soft squeak on the dusty floorboards. She glanced over her shoulder at the narrow doorway leading further into the attic, where the whispering had come from. Her instincts screamed at her to stay away, but the strange curiosity she felt about the voice pulled her in. What could it have been? It didn't sound like a person from the house, but maybe it was one of the workers, or someone else staying here. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more illogical than the last. She took another hesitant step forward, then another, her heartbeat pounding in her chest. The air seemed to grow heavier with each movement, and the silence stretched on like a thick, suffocating blanket. When she reached the doorway, she paused, her hand hovering over the handle. The wood of the door felt cold beneath her fingers, a stark contrast to the warmth of the sun outside. She didn't know why, but she felt a deep hesitation, a pull to turn around and leave. But the curiosity burned too brightly. She had to know. She had to understand what was happening here. With a deep breath, Emily pushed the door open, wincing as the hinges creaked loudly in the silence. The room beyond was dim, shrouded in shadow. She squinted, trying to make out the shape of the space, but everything seemed indistinct, obscured by the flickering light from the single bulb above her. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and she saw rows of old furniture draped in dusty sheets. The furniture looked ancient, some pieces covered in so many layers of dust that they appeared to be abandoned relics from another time. Yet something felt off about the room, like it wasn't entirely forgotten, as if the house had been trying to hide it all along. Emily's throat tightened as she stepped farther into the room. Her footsteps were muffled against the thick layer of dust on the floor, but the sense of intrusion was overwhelming. Her chest tightened with the feeling of being watched again, and she instinctively reached out for the nearest object, a large ornate mirror covered in a thin sheet. Pulling back the fabric, she was met with her reflection, though this time it felt wrong. The reflection didn't match the room. It wasn't just a mirror, it was as if the mirror was a window into something else. Something older, something different. The reflection didn't look like her. It looked like someone else. A woman, pale and ghostly, her eyes wide in terror. Emily stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat as the mirror slipped from her hands. It crashed to the floor with a sharp, unsettling sound, but she didn't have time to react. A low whisper broke the silence again, louder this time. She spun around, trying to locate its source, but the attic seemed to be full of echoes. "Who's there?" she called, her voice sounding small and fragile in the vast, empty space. The whispering stopped. She held her breath, straining to hear anything over the beating of her own heart. The tension was unbearable. It felt as if the air itself was alive, thick with something unspoken, something ancient. Then, from the corner of the room, she saw it movement. A figure. It was a shadow at first, a dark shape that seemed to flicker in the dim light. It moved closer, its form becoming clearer. A man-shaped figure emerging from the darkness. Emily's breath hitched in her chest as her eyes locked onto him. The figure was tall, dressed in tattered clothing, his face obscured by shadows. He stood motionless, his hands at his sides, but Emily could feel his presence pressing down on her, suffocating her. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure didn't respond, but his eyes, cold, empty, and hollow, met hers, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it felt as though they were looking into her soul. The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive. Emily's legs felt like lead, as if the weight of the room was pulling her down. She could hardly move, could hardly breathe. Everything in her screamed for her to run, to escape this nightmare. But she couldn't. She was frozen in place, caught in a gaze that held her captive. And then, as if the moment had never happened, the figure simply vanished. It wasn't like he disappeared into thin air, it was as though he never existed in the first place. One moment, he was there, and the next, the room was empty, the shadows still, the silence profound. Emily blinked, trying to clear her mind, her heart still racing in her chest. She reached out, her fingers trembling, but there was nothing there, no evidence of the man who had been standing in front of her just seconds before. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her mind scrambling to make sense of what she had just seen or hadn't seen. She looked around, the room suddenly feeling far too large and too empty. The faintest sound of a door creaking open echoed in the distance, and Emily snapped her head in the direction of the sound. The attic was silent again, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for her next move. Confused, shaken, and more than a little afraid, Emily hurried back to the main area of the attic, the earlier whispering still echoing in her mind. What had she just experienced? Was it a trick of the mind? Was the house just old? But then, what about the mirror? What about the figure? She stood there, her back pressed against the wall, trying to regain control of her breathing. Everything inside her urged her to leave, to forget this job and the strange happenings in this house. But something, an overwhelming feeling of obligation or perhaps curiosity, kept her from walking out the door. She couldn't explain what she had just witnessed, but she was certain of one thing. Something in this house wasn't right. The hidden truth. Emily stood in the silence of the attic, her heart still racing, her mind trying to process what had just happened. The room around her felt colder, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. She glanced toward the doorway, the faintest sliver of light shining through the cracks, but all she could see was the same eerie darkness that had swallowed the figure moments before. Her skin crawled with the sensation that someone or something was still watching her. The stillness was suffocating, and the weight of the house seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Taking a shaky breath, she forced herself to turn away from the door and continue with the cleaning, although every part of her screamed to leave. She didn't understand why she hadn't just run. Maybe it was the strange pull of the house, the way it seemed to keep her in its grasp, as if it was waiting for her to uncover something. Or maybe it was just sheer curiosity. But one thing was certain. She was in over her head. Her mind kept racing back to the moment she saw the figure, trying to piece together what had happened. Was it real? Was it just a figment of her imagination? A trick of the light? But no, she couldn't deny what she had felt, how real it had seemed. The man's eyes, cold and dark, seemed to pierce through her, and the mirror, reflecting a woman who wasn't her, had been too vivid to ignore. She moved to the far corner of the room, where the dust was thickest, and began cleaning the shelves of old books. Each movement felt robotic, as though her body was on autopilot. She had to keep herself busy, had to push the thoughts from her mind. But the whispers were still there, echoing in her ears, even though the house remained silent. Suddenly, there was a creak from the hallway. It was faint, but it was enough to make Emily freeze, her hand gripping the rag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes darted toward the door to the attic. She hadn't heard anyone come up the stairs, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Was Richard back? Had someone been watching her? She took a cautious step forward, trying to remain as quiet as possible. She glanced at the window to see the light outside shifting, the sun slowly dipping lower in the sky. She had no idea how much time had passed. It felt like hours had gone by, but she hadn't made much progress in the attic. The unsettling atmosphere was taking its toll. As she moved toward the door, a voice inside her mind told her to stop. She paused, her fingers brushing the handle, just about to turn it. A strange sensation washed over her, a sense that if she opened that door, she would uncover something that could never be undone, something that would change everything. Before she could second-guess herself, the door swung open, and Emily stepped back, startled. Standing in the doorway was Richard Winthrop. His sharp, authoritative presence filled the threshold, his dark suit contrasting with the dust and cobwebs of the attic. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I didn't expect you to still be here," he said, his voice low but commanding. I thought you were away," Emily stammered, trying to regain her composure. "I was," Richard replied, stepping further into the attic. "But I needed to check on something. This house has a lot of history and, well, sometimes it's hard to let go of things." His words hung in the air, and Emily felt a chill settle into her bones. She wasn't sure what he meant by history, but it was clear that there was more to this house than she had initially realized. More to him, too. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Richard continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "But I see you found some of the old things." Emily swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in her stomach. There was something about the way he said it, the way his eyes lingered on the dusty objects around them, that sent a ripple of unease through her. "No, it's fine," she said quickly, her voice sounding far steadier than she felt. "I was just cleaning. It's just that—" She hesitated, not sure if she should mention the whispers or the figure. It was probably best to keep quiet. "I didn't expect it to be so quiet in here." Richard's lips twitched into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "The silence can be unsettling," he said, "especially when you've been here as long as I have. But there's something peaceful about it, too. You get used to it." His words felt rehearsed, as though he had said them before. Emily's instincts screamed that he wasn't being completely honest, but she didn't know how to press further. Something about his presence made it difficult to ask the questions burning in her mind. "I'll finish up soon," Emily said, moving toward the cleaning supplies. "If you need anything else, I'm happy to help." Richard nodded but didn't move. His gaze followed her movements, and for a moment, Emily felt as though he were sizing her up, assessing her. The tension between them was palpable. "I'm sure you will," Richard said, his voice dropping slightly. "But be careful. Some things are better left undisturbed. Not everything in this house is what it seems. His words felt like a warning, though she couldn't tell if it was out of concern or something else entirely. He turned to leave, but before he exited the room, he paused at the doorframe and glanced over his shoulder. "Thank you for helping, Emily. You don't know how much it means." She nodded, unsure of what to say. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Emily alone once again in the attic. But now, the silence felt different. It wasn't just the quiet of an empty room, it was oppressive, like something had changed in the air. Something heavy had settled in her chest, a weight that wouldn't lift. She was sure of one thing now. Richard Winthrop wasn't the man he seemed to be. And the house? It was hiding something. Something that wasn't just dust and old furniture. Something far more dangerous. The whispering had stopped, but the feeling of being watched hadn't. Secrets beneath the surface. The air in the attic felt suffocating now, the silence almost oppressive. Emily's thoughts churned as she slowly began to clean again, her movements mechanical, disconnected. Richard's sudden appearance had unsettled her, but it was the finality in his words that made her skin crawl. Not everything in this house is what it seems. What had he meant by that? And what was it he was hiding? As she wiped the dust from an old chair in the corner, her mind refused to focus on the task at hand. Instead, it kept drifting back to the feeling she had when Richard entered the room the way he looked at her, as if he knew something she didn't. She couldn't shake the thought that she had just brushed up against something far darker than she'd realized, and it terrified her that she couldn't quite understand what it was. She glanced toward the attic door, still slightly ajar. Richard hadn't locked it behind him. Was that intentional? A part of her wondered if he had left it open for a reason, a warning, or perhaps an invitation to keep looking. She hesitated. Something inside her tugged at her to leave the attic, to leave this place and never look back. But the pull of curiosity, combined with the strange, almost desperate feeling of being trapped, kept her rooted to the spot. She had to know more. There was something in the house, something in the attic that wasn't right, and she couldn't leave until she uncovered it. Taking a deep breath, she moved toward the far wall of the room, where a heavy, dust-covered trunk sat beneath a pile of old blankets. She hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed to call to her, as if it were waiting for her to discover its contents. Emily's fingers brushed across the rough surface of the trunk, her heart hammering in her chest. What could be inside? Was it just another forgotten relic of the past? Or was it the key to understanding what was happening in this house? With trembling hands, she opened the lid. The inside of the trunk was packed with old papers, yellowed with age. As she sifted through the clutter, she found an assortment of letters, photographs, and documents, all of them related to the Winthrop family. But one photo in particular caught her eye. It was a faded black and white picture of Richard Winthrop's grandparents, standing together in front of the same mansion she was in now. Only, there was something off about the picture. The couple in the photo was smiling, but their eyes were empty, as if they were looking through the lens, not at it. It made Emily's blood run cold. She reached for the photo, her hands shaking as she turned it over. On the back was a single word scrawled in faded ink: curse. Her mind raced. What could this mean? Was Richard's family involved in something dark, something twisted? The word hung heavy in the air, as if it were a warning. Was it possible the mansion was cursed, as the cryptic message suggested? Emily turned the photo over again, hoping it would reveal more. But as she stared at the couple's haunting expressions, she felt a chill crawl up her spine. The sense of being watched, that eerie feeling she had been experiencing all afternoon, intensified. It was as if the walls of the attic were closing in on her, the air growing thicker with each passing second. She had to get out, but something in her gut told her she was too deep into this now. She couldn't just walk away. As she sat there holding the photograph, the whispering returned. It was faint at first, like a distant murmur, but it quickly grew louder. The words weren't clear at first, but they were unmistakable. pulling at her in a way she couldn't explain. The voice seemed to come from all around her, a whisper that echoed in her mind and made her pulse race. "Help me." The words were soft, desperate. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She looked around the attic, the sound filling the room, but there was no one there. She stood up, her body trembling with fear. The whispering was growing louder now, more urgent. "Help me, Emily." Her heart pounded in her chest as the voice called her name. She dropped the photograph and rushed toward the door, her legs weak beneath her. But as she reached for the handle, a cold gust of wind slammed the door shut with a violent thud. She spun around, her body frozen in terror. The attic had changed. The walls, once old and forgotten, now seemed alive, the shadows reaching toward her like fingers. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and the temperature had dropped to an almost unbearable chill. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice cracking with fear. The whispering stopped for a moment, then returned, but this time it was louder, more distinct. The words were clear now, begging, pleading. "I can't escape. Help me." A figure appeared in the corner of the attic. It was a woman, pale and ethereal, her long, dark hair cascading around her face. Her clothes were tattered, and her eyes were wide with terror, filled with the same haunting emptiness Emily had seen in the photo. The woman reached out to her, her hand trembling as if she were trying to touch the living. Emily's heart raced, her breath shallow as she backed away. The figure wasn't just a hallucination, this woman was real, or at least she appeared to be. The woman's mouth opened, but no sound came out, only more whispers. Emily could barely make out the words as they washed over her like a wave. "Find the truth. Break the curse." The figure took a step forward, and Emily felt an overwhelming sense of dread rise in her chest. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. All she could do was watch in horror as the woman's form seemed to flicker, like a candle flame about to extinguish. And then, with a sudden, jarring motion, the figure disappeared. The room fell deathly quiet. Emily collapsed to her knees, the weight of everything crashing down on her all at once. Her mind spun with questions. Who was the woman? What had she meant by break the curse? Was Richard somehow involved in this? And what did this all have to do with the mansion, the photo, and the word curse? The truth was out there, hidden beneath the layers of dust and forgotten memories. But Emily didn't know if she was ready to face it, or if she ever would be. All she knew now was that she had to leave this place before whatever haunted the house found her again. A dangerous unraveling. Emily's heart still raced as she struggled to regain her composure. She sat on the cold floor, her body trembling from a mixture of fear and disbelief. The woman's apparition, her desperate plea, the chilling whispers that filled the attic, it was all too much. She could still feel the weight of the figure's presence, lingering in the air like a cloud of static, as though the very space around her was charged with dark energy. She glanced around the attic, now seeming more suffocating than ever. The dust seemed to hover in the stagnant air, unmoving, waiting. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and contort, playing tricks on her mind. It wasn't just the house that felt haunted. It was her. The chilling image of the woman's face, her terror-stricken eyes, were seared into Emily's memory. She couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was trying to warn her, that she was involved in something much bigger than herself. Find the truth. Break the curse. The words echoed in her mind like a broken record, relentlessly repeating. What truth? What curse? She needed answers, but she didn't know where to turn. The house was a labyrinth of secrets, and every corner seemed to hide something darker than the last. Emily stood up, her legs unsteady beneath her. She couldn't stay here. She had to leave. But as she made her way toward the door, she froze. The whispering returned, not from the woman this time, but from somewhere else deep within the house. It was as if the entire mansion was alive, whispering to her, beckoning her to stay, to uncover the secrets that had been buried for generations. With a sense of dread creeping up her spine, Emily turned toward the stairs leading down to the main level of the house. She had to find Richard. She had to confront him, to ask him about everything: the woman in the attic, the cursed photo, the cryptic message. She couldn't ignore it anymore. There was too much at stake. But as she descended the stairs, the silence of the house seemed to press in on her. The floorboards creaked under her weight, echoing in the empty space. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. Every step she took felt heavier, as though the house itself was holding her in its grip. When she reached the main floor, the house was eerily quiet. There was no sign of Richard. The assistant she had met earlier was nowhere to be found either. It was as if the mansion had swallowed them whole. A thick, uneasy silence filled the air, and Emily's skin crawled with the sensation that something was terribly wrong. She wandered through the grand hall, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The grandeur of the mansion, once impressive, now seemed cold and oppressive. The walls, adorned with priceless artwork, seemed to loom over her, their eyes following her every movement. The windows, usually bathed in sunlight, were now shrouded in shadow, the curtains billowing in the breeze from an open window, though there was no breeze to be found. Her mind was racing, her thoughts fragmented. She needed to find Richard. She needed answers. The house was filled with secrets, secrets that had been carefully hidden for years, and she had stumbled upon them. It was too much to ignore, too dangerous to walk away from. She made her way through the mansion, her steps quickening as she approached the study. The heavy door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open cautiously. The study was dimly lit, the only light coming from the flickering flames in the fireplace. Richard was sitting behind a large oak desk, his back to her. He seemed lost in thought, his hands resting on the surface of the desk, fingers tapping rhythmically. For a moment, Emily hesitated. She didn't know what she was going to say, but she knew she had to confront him. The events of the past few hours had shaken her to her core, and she couldn't let him keep hiding the truth from her. "Richard," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond immediately. He didn't even turn around. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped further into the room, her gaze never leaving his figure. "I need to know what's going on," she continued, her voice steadier now. "I need to know what happened in the attic. Who was that woman? What does curse mean?" Finally, Richard turned in his chair, his expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in his gaze, something distant, almost hollow. He didn't look like the powerful CEO she had seen earlier. In that moment, he looked tired, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Richard said, his voice low and calm. "I didn't want you to get involved." Emily frowned. "Involved in what? What is this house hiding?" Richard sighed deeply, running a hand through his dark hair. "It's not just the house. It's the family. The Winthrop family has been cursed for generations. It's a long story, but the short version is this. Our ancestors made a pact with something dark. It's been passed down through the family, and every generation has paid the price." Emily listened, her heart racing as Richard spoke. She could feel the weight of his words sinking in, the weight of the curse that had been cast upon this family. The figure in the attic, the whispers, the photo, it was all connected. "We've tried to break the curse before," Richard continued, his voice tightening. "But each time, it gets worse. People get hurt, and I thought I could escape it. I thought I could bury it. But it's never that simple. The curse never lets go. It always finds its way back." Emily's mind spun with what he was saying. "And the woman in the attic? What's her role in all this?" Richard's expression darkened. "She was the first to suffer. Her name was Eliza Winthrop. She tried to break the curse, but she failed. And now her spirit lingers, trapped in this house, unable to rest. She's the one who's been warning you." Emily's throat tightened as the weight of his words settled over her. Eliza Winthrop. The name echoed in her mind. The woman in the attic wasn't just a ghost. She was someone who had lived, someone who had tried to escape the same fate Emily was now facing. Richard stood up, his eyes searching hers. "I never wanted you to be part of this, Emily. But now that you're here, I can't protect you from what's coming." The house was closing in on them, and Emily realized, with a cold sense of dread, that she was no longer just a spectator. She was part of the curse. Unraveling the curse. The room felt like it was closing in on Emily. The walls, once majestic and full of history, now seemed to press down on her, trapping her in a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Richard's words lingered in the air, thick and heavy, as the gravity of what he had just revealed settled deep in her chest. The Winthrop family was cursed, bound by a dark pact, and Eliza Winthrop, the woman in the attic, was just one of the many victims who had fallen prey to it. Emily's breath quickened as she struggled to process it all. She had come here to clean, to do her job, and yet she was now entangled in a centuries-old curse that had been buried beneath layers of time and deception. The whispers, the figure in the attic, the strange sense of being watched. It was all connected to the Winthrop legacy, and it wasn't just a ghost or a haunting. It was something far more insidious. "Richard," she said, her voice trembling. "What does this have to do with me? Why did the woman in the attic call my name? What am I supposed to do?" Richard ran a hand through his hair, his gaze distant, as if the weight of his family's past was something he had carried alone for far too long. "I don't know, Emily. All I know is that you've been drawn into this for a reason. Maybe it's because you found Eliza's photo. Maybe it's because you stepped into this house. The curse doesn't just go after family, it takes whoever it can. Whoever is unlucky enough to uncover its secrets." Emily's heart sank. Unlucky enough to uncover its secrets. She had walked into this house unknowingly, thinking it would just be another simple cleaning job, and now she was thrust into a nightmarish web of betrayal, death, and family secrets. Family. But what exactly was she supposed to do? Richard seemed just as lost as she was, trapped in the same fate. "How do we break it?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. She had to know. She couldn't leave without understanding how to stop this madness. The terror she felt in the attic, the apparition of Eliza, it was too real to ignore. The curse had marked her, and there was no turning back. Richard's face twisted in a grimace. "We've tried before. Eliza tried, but she failed. The curse doesn't want to be broken. It's bound to this house, to our family. It always finds a way to drag us back in." Emily's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of information she had gathered over the past few hours. Eliza Winthrop, the woman who had tried to escape the curse, had failed. But why? Why couldn't she break free? And why was Emily being dragged into this? "What happened to Eliza?" she asked, her voice low with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Richard hesitated, his eyes darkening. Eliza was different. She knew the truth. She knew about the pact, the curse that haunted our bloodline. She was determined to end it, to free us all. But the curse didn't let her go. It twisted her mind, made her believe that she could control it, that she could break it. She became obsessed, and in the end, it consumed her. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine as Richard's words echoed in her mind. The curse consumed her. She could feel a deep sympathy for Eliza, but also a growing sense of dread. Eliza's fate had been sealed, and now it seemed like Emily was walking down the same path. "How do you know this?" Emily pressed, her voice trembling. "What exactly did Eliza do? How did she change?" Richard's expression faltered, as if he had been carrying a burden far too heavy to bear. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and regret. "I tried to stop her," he said quietly. "But by then, she was too far gone. She became obsessed with finding the answers, with uncovering the truth behind the curse. She thought she could control it, but the more she dug, the more it took from her. She began to change her appearance, her behavior, everything. And then, one night, she just disappeared. No one ever found her. But I know she's still here, trapped in this house. Her spirit never left. Emily shuddered. The thought of Eliza's spirit still lingering in the mansion was too much to bear. She had felt the presence of something in the attic, something dark and tragic, and now she knew it was Eliza's spirit, still seeking a way to free herself from the curse. "Is that what happened to you?" Emily asked softly, her eyes meeting Richard's. "Is that why you're so distant, so cold? You've been trying to break the curse, haven't you?" Richard's jaw tightened, and for a moment, his mask of control slipped, revealing a vulnerability Emily hadn't expected. "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my entire life trying to escape it, trying to protect my family. But the curse won't let go. It's too powerful. It finds its way into everything, into every decision, every relationship. No one is safe." Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. She couldn't imagine the burden Richard had carried all these years. The guilt, the fear, the hopelessness. But she also couldn't ignore the fact that she was now involved in this nightmare. She had walked into a house filled with secrets, and now she was a part of the story, whether she liked it or not. "We have to do something," Emily said, her voice gaining strength. "I can't just sit here and do nothing. I can't let this happen to me, to you, to anyone else." Richard looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What do you suggest we do? There's nothing left to do. The curse always wins." Emily's gaze hardened. "That's not true. We can't just give up. There has to be a way to break it." Richard's eyes softened for a moment, as if seeing something in her that he hadn't seen before. He seemed to consider her words, and then finally he spoke. "You're right. There's always a way. But breaking the curse won't be easy. It will take more than just willpower. It will take everything we have and more." Emily felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. Whatever it took, she was willing to do it. She had already seen too much, felt too much. She couldn't walk away. The curse had already claimed so much, but it wasn't going to claim her. "What do we need to do?" Emily asked, her voice steady now. Richard's face grew grim again, his eyes searching hers. "We need to go back to the source. The pact, the one that started it all. We need to find it, confront it, and destroy it. If we can't break the curse from its root, it will keep claiming more lives." Emily nodded, a sense of purpose flooding her. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about breaking the cycle, ending the curse once and for all. But she knew, deep down, that the journey ahead would be dangerous. They would have to face whatever haunted the mansion, whatever was waiting in the shadows. The curse had already claimed one victim, Eliza, and Emily wasn't sure she could survive if it claimed her, too. But she had no choice. It was time to fight back. Confronting the darkness. The air in the study felt heavy, thick with the weight of Richard's words. Emily stood frozen for a moment, absorbing what he had said. The curse had a root, a source, and it was tied to the Winthrop family's dark pact. The house, with all its beauty and grandeur, was nothing more than a cage, an inescapable prison for those who tried to break free from its sinister grip. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. She couldn't afford to let fear paralyze her. Not now. Richard had been right about one thing. The curse would keep coming, keep claiming lives, until it was destroyed at its core. Eliza had tried to fight it, and she had failed. But Emily wasn't going to make the same mistake. She couldn't let herself become just another victim. Richard's eyes met hers, and there was something in them now, a flicker of determination, perhaps, or maybe something even deeper, a glimmer of hope. He had carried the burden of his family's curse for so long, and for the first time, Emily saw that he wasn't as detached as he had appeared. She wasn't alone in this fight. "I don't know where to start," Richard said, his voice tight with frustration. "The curse is rooted in the past, in the choices made by my ancestors. We can't change what they did, but we can try to stop it from continuing." Emily nodded. "Then we need to start by finding out everything we can about the pact. Who made it? Why? How?" Richard glanced toward the door, as if he were weighing whether to share more. There's a library downstairs. My grandfather kept records, old journals, letters, anything related to the family history. It's where Eliza started her search. She believed the answers were there, hidden among the pages. Emily's pulse quickened. She had a feeling that this was the key, the place where everything would come together. The library. If they could uncover the truth behind the curse, perhaps they could find a way to break it for good. "Let's go," she said, her voice resolute. Richard didn't hesitate. Together they moved out of the study and down the long, winding corridor that led to the library. The mansion felt even more oppressive now, its silence weighing heavily on their shoulders. The flickering candles on the walls cast long shadows, stretching like dark fingers across the polished floors. As they entered the library, Emily's eyes were immediately drawn to the shelves that lined the walls, filled with leather-bound books and ancient manuscripts. The room smelled faintly of dust and aged paper, the air thick with the scent of history. She felt a sense of foreboding as she crossed the threshold. This was where Eliza had spent her final days, where she had desperately tried to uncover the truth before she disappeared. The same truth that had now brought Emily here. Richard walked over to a desk in the center of the room where a pile of old journals and letters were stacked neatly. "These are my grandfather's," he said quietly, as he flipped open the first journal. He was the last to try and break the curse. He thought he could do it. But like everyone before him, he failed. Emily moved closer, her eyes scanning the pages. The handwriting was elegant. The ink faded with age, but the words were still clear. As Richard read aloud, Emily's heart began to race. "This is it," Richard said, his voice trembling. "This is where it all began." The journal detailed the story of a pact made generations ago, a bargain struck between the Winthrop family and a mysterious entity that promised power in exchange for something far more sinister. The entity referred to only as the darkness had promised wealth and influence beyond measure, but at a terrible cost. The family would be bound to the pact for eternity, and each generation would pay the price for their ancestors' choices. Emily felt a chill creep down her spine as she listened. The price was clear. The Winthrop family would never be free of the curse. It would pass from one generation to the next, each family member doomed to suffer the consequences of the pact made long ago. "But why Eliza?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did she become obsessed with breaking it?" Richard paused, his fingers hovering over the pages. Eliza. She believed that if she could find the original agreement, the one that started it all, she could break the curse. She thought if she destroyed it, the pact would be nullified. But she underestimated the darkness. It wasn't just about finding the papers. The curse was alive. It fed off of fear, of desperation. And Eliza, she was desperate. Emily's stomach tightened as she listened. Eliza's obsession with breaking the curse had driven her to madness. And now Emily was walking the same path, following the same clues, unaware of how deep the darkness ran. As Richard continued to read, the journal spoke of a hidden room, an ancient chamber buried deep beneath the mansion, where the original agreement was said to be sealed. The room, however, was locked, and no one had been able to find the key. Eliza had searched tirelessly, but it was as if the room itself refused to be discovered. "I don't think Eliza ever found the room," Richard said, his voice thick with sorrow. "I think that's why she ended up in the attic. The house didn't let her go. It trapped her there, in a way." Emily's mind raced. The hidden room. It was the final piece of the puzzle. If they could find it, they could find the original agreement. And if they could destroy it, the curse would end. Richard closed the journal, his eyes locking with Emily's. "We have to find that room. We have to stop it before it's too late." Emily nodded, feeling a surge of determination. The curse had haunted this family for far too long. Eliza's spirit had begged for freedom, and now it was up to them to set things right. The darkness had waited long enough, but the path ahead would not be easy. They had to confront the very heart of the curse, the source that had bound the Winthrop family for generations. "Where do we start?" Emily asked, her voice steady. Richard looked at her, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "We start by going deeper into the house. We start by finding the key." and with that, they set out to uncover the truth, unaware of the dangers that awaited them as they ventured further into the mansion's hidden depths. The house was alive, and it would not let them go without a fight. Into the heart of darkness. The mansion felt different as Emily and Richard moved deeper into its heart. The air grew thicker, the silence heavier, as if the house itself was watching them, waiting for them to make the wrong move. Each step they took seemed to echo through the long, empty corridors, amplifying their presence in the sprawling labyrinth of rooms. The weight of history hung over them, the past pressing down like a suffocating fog, and the further they went, the more the oppressive atmosphere seemed to tighten around them. The library, once filled with the promise of answers, now felt like a distant memory. The pages of the journals they had read only served to raise more questions. Questions about the hidden room, the original agreement, and the mysterious key that would unlock the secrets buried beneath the house. Eliza had spent years searching for it, and now it was Emily and Richard's turn to continue the search. But unlike Eliza, they weren't just looking for an answer, they were looking for a way out, a way to end the curse once and for all. The mansion's layout was like a puzzle, with winding staircases, secret passages, and rooms that seemed to shift when they weren't looking. Richard led the way, his steps confident, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, like it was shifting, changing, reacting to their every move. The walls seemed to close in on them, the shadows stretching longer with each step. As they reached the end of a narrow hallway, Richard stopped in front of an old wooden door, its surface worn with age. The door was smaller than the others in the house, unremarkable even, but there was something about it that made Emily's heart race. This was it, the place where the key to the curse, and perhaps the key to their survival, was hidden. Richard hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the doorknob. "This is the last place we can look," he said quietly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've never been in here before. No one in the family has. I don't even know if the key will be here, but if Eliza was right, this is where the answer lies." Emily nodded, her pulse quickening. She could feel it now, an unmistakable pull, like gravity, urging her toward the door. She wasn't sure if it was the house or the curse itself, but there was a powerful force drawing her in. The only way out was through this door, and they couldn't afford to turn back. Richard turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, dimly lit by the faint glow of a single flickering candle. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old books, maps, and strange artifacts, most of which Emily couldn't identify. The air smelled musty, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. But what caught her attention wasn't the shelves or the books. It was the large stone pedestal in the center of the room. It was ancient, worn with time, but it had a strange magnetic quality to it, as if it had been placed here for a purpose. On top of the pedestal sat a single object, a rusted iron key. It was old, twisted, and jagged, almost too distorted to be recognizable as a key at all. Its presence was unsettling, as if it had been waiting for them all along. Emily stepped forward, her breath held, and reached out for it. The instant her fingers brushed the cold metal, a sharp jolt of energy surged through her body, and the room seemed to shift. The walls groaned, the floor creaked, and for a split second, Emily thought she saw something move in the shadows. She jerked her hand back, startled, but Richard stepped forward to pick up the key. The moment he touched it, a deep, resonant sound echoed throughout the house, like the turning of a great wheel. Emily felt the ground beneath her shift, as if the house itself was rearranging itself, aligning in response to the key's presence. "We've done it," Richard said, his voice shaky but filled with awe. "This is it, the key to everything." But Emily wasn't so sure. She could feel the house growing restless, the air thickening with malevolent energy. The key felt wrong, like it had been forged in some dark place, designed to open doors that should never be unlocked. "What now?" Emily asked, her voice tight. Richard held the key up to the dim light, his expression grim. "Now we go to the heart of it, the chamber beneath the mansion." We have to use this key to unlock the original agreement, the pact that started the curse. Once we destroy it, the curse will end. A cold shiver ran down Emily's spine. They were so close now. But the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it felt. The house seemed to be fighting them, as if it didn't want them to uncover its secrets. "Let's go," she said, trying to steady her nerves. "We can't stop now." With the key in hand, they moved deeper into the mansion, the walls narrowing, the air growing colder as they descended further into the bowels of the house. The shadows grew longer, the flickering candlelight casting strange shapes on the walls. Emily's mind raced with thoughts of the pact, of the curse, and of the woman in the attic. The same fate that had claimed Eliza, that had claimed so many others, was closing in on them. But Emily refused to let it consume her. They had to finish this. After what felt like an eternity of winding passageways and secret corridors, they reached a small, narrow staircase hidden behind a false wall in the basement. It led them down into the very foundation of the mansion, where the air was damp and suffocating. The stairwell seemed to stretch on forever, each step echoing off the stone walls, amplifying their anxiety. At the bottom of the stairs, they reached a heavy iron door. It was ancient, the surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Richard stepped forward, holding the key in his hand, and inserted it into the lock. The door creaked open with an eerie groan, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The walls were covered in strange symbols and markings, the air thick with the scent of decay. In the center of the room stood an altar covered in dust and cobwebs, but there was no mistaking what it was. This was where the pact had been made, where it had all begun. The floor beneath them seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, and Emily felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The curse had been waiting for them to arrive, and now they were standing at its heart. "This is it," Richard whispered, his voice trembling. "We're at the source. We have to destroy it." But as he stepped forward to approach the altar, the room seemed to darken, the shadows stretching unnaturally, as if the very air was turning against them. "Be careful," Emily said, her voice barely audible. "We don't know what we're dealing with." As Richard reached the altar, the air shifted once more. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the chamber, and the ground beneath them trembled. Something was waking up. Something ancient, something powerful. They were no longer just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for their very souls. The pact unveiled. The tremors in the chamber grew stronger, the very floor beneath Emily's feet vibrating with the weight of something ancient and powerful awakening. The low, guttural rumbling filled the air, reverberating through the stone walls like a warning, like the house itself was coming alive, angry at their intrusion. Emily's heart raced, her breath shallow as she stood frozen at the threshold of the altar room. This wasn't just a chamber, it was a portal, a place where the curse had taken root, where the darkness had festered for generations. Richard stood at the altar, the iron key still clutched tightly in his hand. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear as he examined the ancient symbols etched into the altar's surface. The room seemed to pulse with energy, the air thick with a malevolent presence that wrapped around them like a suffocating fog. Emily could feel it, the oppressive weight of the curse, hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. "Richard?" Emily called, her voice trembling. "We have to destroy it. We have to end this now." But Richard didn't answer. He was staring at the altar, his gaze fixed on the dark markings that covered its surface. The symbols glowed faintly, an eerie light flickering beneath their ancient grooves. Emily stepped forward cautiously, her footsteps echoing through the room. Every instinct told her to turn back, to run from this place, but she couldn't. She couldn't leave without doing what they had come here to do. She reached Richard's side and placed a hand on his shoulder. His body was rigid, his muscles tense. He was shaking, but whether from fear or anticipation, she couldn't tell. "This is it," Richard said softly, his voice distant. "This is where it all began. The pact, the price, everything." Emily glanced at the altar, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the darkness in the room, a palpable presence that seemed to rise from the stone floor and seep into the very air they breathed. The curse was alive, thriving in this space, and they were standing at the very heart of it. "What are we supposed to do?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "How do we break it?" Richard shook his head slowly, as if trying to make sense of everything. "I don't know. I don't know what the original agreement says, but the key, it's the only thing that can unlock the truth. The pact was sealed with blood, with sacrifice. If we want to destroy it, we have to undo what was done." Emily's stomach churned at his words. Blood. Sacrifice. She had heard whispers of such things, of deals made with dark forces, of families cursed for generations, but standing here, in this room, with the weight of it all pressing down on her, it felt too real, too dangerous. And yet they had no choice. They had come too far. She looked down at the key in Richard's hand, the twisted iron that had opened the door to this nightmare. She had felt its power when she touched it earlier, the sharp jolt that had surged through her body. Now, as she looked at it again, it seemed to pulse with energy, as though it was calling to something in the room. "Do it," Emily said, her voice steadier now. "We can't wait any longer. We have to end this." Richard hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He stepped forward, his hand trembling as he placed the key into a small slot in the center of the altar. The moment he turned it, the room seemed to shift. The ground beneath them groaned, the stone walls vibrating violently as the symbols on the altar flared to life, glowing with an unnatural light. The rumbling sound intensified, rising to a deafening roar. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that was almost suffocating. Emily felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as she instinctively stepped back. The altar seemed to open, revealing a hidden compartment within the stone structure. Inside, there was an old scroll, its edges yellowed with age, its surface covered in a dark, brittle material. It was the agreement, the original pact that had cursed the Winthrop family. Richard carefully reached into the compartment and pulled out the scroll, holding it in his hands like it was fragile, like it could disintegrate at any moment. He unrolled it slowly, the parchment crackling with the effort. The words on the page were written in an ancient language, symbols that Emily couldn't recognize, but there was no mistaking the dark energy that radiated from it. This was the source of the curse, the binding agreement that had held the Winthrop family in its grip for centuries. Emily felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest as she stared at the scroll. The darkness was thickening around them, pressing in like a physical force, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. She could see Richard's face growing pale as he read the words aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "I, Aldrich Winthrop, do bind myself and my descendants to the darkness, in exchange for power, wealth, and influence beyond measure. May my blood be the price for generations to come, and may the house stand as a monument to our agreement." Emily felt a cold sweat break out across her skin as Richard's voice faltered. He paused, looking at the last line of the scroll, his eyes widening in horror. "There's more," Richard said, his voice strained. It says that the pact can only be broken by the blood of the one who made it, Aldrich Winthrop. His blood must be spilled in the place where the pact was sealed." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Aldrich Winthrop, Richard's ancestor, the one who had made the pact. And the price to break it was his blood sacrificed in the very room where it had all begun. She turned to Richard, her mind racing. "That means—" Richard nodded, his face pale, his eyes haunted. "It means that the only way to break the curse is to kill the last living descendant of Aldrich Winthrop, the one who still carries his blood. It's me." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Richard, the man she had grown to trust, to care for, was the very key to destroying the curse. But the price was his life. He would have to die to end the curse, to free the family from its dark grip. "No," Emily whispered, shaking her head. "There has to be another way. We can't." But Richard raised his hand, his expression resolute. "It's the only way. I knew this day would come. I've spent my life running from it, but now there's no choice. The curse has claimed so much already. It's time to end it." Emily felt her chest tighten as the reality of the situation hit her. They had come so close to breaking the curse, but the price was steep, too steep. But in that moment, she realized something. Richard had already made his peace with it. He had already decided that his life, his blood, would be the final price to free the family from the curse. Emily had no choice but to respect that. She couldn't stop it. But she would make sure that his sacrifice was not in vain. "We'll do it together," Emily said softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. And with that, they took the final step toward breaking the curse once and for all. The final sacrifice. The chamber seemed to close in around them as Emily and Richard stood in the heart of the cursed house. The ancient scroll, still in Richard's hands, seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Its words burned into the air, searing through their minds. The house had been waiting for this moment, for the final reckoning, and now it was up to them to carry out the ultimate sacrifice. Richard stood still, the scroll trembling in his hands, his face pale and drawn. His eyes were distant, lost in the weight of the decision he had made. Emily could feel the heaviness of the moment pressing down on her. This was the point of no return. The curse, the pact, the darkness that had haunted Richard's family for generations, it was all leading to this moment, to his death. For a brief second, Emily thought about running, about turning away from this nightmare and escaping. But she couldn't. She couldn't abandon him now. Not when he was ready to give everything to free his family from the curse that had bound them for centuries. His blood was the final key, the last price to pay. The house was shifting, the walls groaning with anticipation. There was no turning back. Richard met her eyes, his gaze filled with a quiet sorrow. "Emily, He broke off, taking a deep breath. "I know what this means. I know what I have to do. But I need you to stay with me. Please." Emily nodded, her throat tight, the words too heavy to say. She couldn't imagine what Richard must have been feeling. All his life, he had carried the burden of his family's curse, and now he was ready to sacrifice himself to end it. She had watched him struggle, seen his pain, his hesitation. But here, in the dark heart of the mansion, there was only one choice left. Together, they walked toward the altar, the room seemingly narrowing around them. The air was thick with the power of the curse, the weight of history pressing down on their shoulders. The symbols on the walls seemed to twist and writhe, the darkness coming to life, responding to the key that Richard still held in his hand. They had come so far, and now, the house would demand its final toll. Richard stepped up to the altar, his hands shaking as he placed the scroll down before it. The key, still glowing faintly in his grasp, seemed to pulse in response, its jagged edges vibrating with the dark power of the pact. Emily stepped back, her heart heavy, her mind racing with all the implications of what was about to happen. Richard took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving the altar. "This is the only way, Emily. The curse won't end without this." She wanted to protest, to beg him to reconsider, but the words died in her throat. She had seen his pain, his guilt, and the weight of the legacy he carried. This was his chance to set things right. For him, for Eliza, for everyone who had been caught in the web of this cursed family. Emily's hand hovered over his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm, offering him silent support. "I'm with you," she whispered. "You're not alone." Richard gave her a small, sad smile, and then, with a final, steadying breath, he raised the key above the altar. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thickening with anticipation. The moment had arrived. With a final motion, Richard placed the key into a lock on the altar, the mechanism clicking into place with a sound like a distant thunderclap. The room shuddered as the altar creaked, and the symbols on the walls flared with a blinding light. The house groaned, its walls shifting, as if it were alive and reacting to the key's power. The darkness that had been dormant for so long was stirring, and the room seemed to pulse with energy like the beating of a heart. And then, just as suddenly as the light flared, the room fell into complete darkness. The air was thick with tension, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't see anything, only hear the erratic thumping of her heart and the soft, unsettling whisper of the house, as if it were speaking in a language too old for human ears. In the pitch-black silence, Emily heard Richard's voice, low and strained. "It's time." And then, in the deepest, most guttural voice she had ever heard, a shadow. A figure emerged from the darkness, its shape indistinct but powerful. It was not a man, nor a woman, but something else, something ancient, a being born from the very pact that had cursed Richard's family. The darkness. Emily felt a cold, bone-deep fear flood through her as the entity reached toward them, its presence suffocating. The temperature in the room dropped, the shadows closing in on them, pressing against her chest. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She could feel Richard's hand trembling in hers, the weight of his impending sacrifice hanging over them both. But Richard didn't back down. He stood tall, his resolve unshaken, despite the dark force standing before him. "This ends now," he said, his voice strong, unwavering. The darkness let out a low, rumbling laugh, deep and terrifying. "You think you can escape your fate?" It hissed, its voice like the crackling of dry leaves in the wind. "You cannot undo what has been done. The pact is sealed. The price must be paid." Richard's grip tightened on the key, his body trembling, but his gaze never faltered. "I don't care what you say. I will break this curse. I will free my family." The darkness shrieked, a terrible wailing sound that reverberated through the room, shaking the very walls. The air crackled with power, and Emily felt a surge of energy rush through her, but it was not her own. It was the key, the final moment of the curse unraveling. Richard raised his hand, the key glowing brighter now, its jagged edges flashing with a brilliant, almost painful light. The darkness recoiled, hissing in fury, and then, with one final, desperate motion, Richard plunged the key into the altar, and the house itself seemed to shudder, its bones groaning as if it were dying. A blinding flash of light filled the room, and for a moment, Emily was sure she was blinded. The light grew brighter, the air charged with the energy of the curse being broken, the weight of centuries of suffering lifting from the house. The darkness screamed once more, and then, like smoke dissipating in the wind, it was gone. The room fell silent, the energy stilling. The temperature in the room slowly returned to normal, and the oppressive weight that had hung over them for so long began to lift. Richard staggered back, his body collapsing into Emily's arms. She caught him, holding him close as his breath came in shallow gasps. "You did it," Emily whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You freed us. You ended it." Richard smiled weakly, his eyes barely open. "We did it. Together." And as they stood in the heart of the mansion, the house seemed to sigh, the darkness finally lifted. The curse had been broken. The Winthrop family was free. But Emily knew one thing. This was only the beginning of their new life. Together. A new beginning. The air was still. The house, once alive with darkness and suffering, had fallen silent. The heavy weight that had pressed down on Emily and Richard was now gone, like a shadow lifted at dawn. For a moment they just stood there, surrounded by the remnants of the curse, unsure of what came next. The energy in the room had shifted. The house, though ancient, seemed to breathe easier now, as if it were finally at rest. Richard leaned heavily against Emily, his body exhausted but relieved. The weight of his family's curse had been lifted, but it had come at the price of his own blood, his own sacrifice. He had ended the pact, destroyed the darkness, but in doing so, he had allowed himself to be freed. Emily's heart ached as she looked at him, his face pale, his body frail, but his eyes were full of something she hadn't seen in a long time. Peace. "Richard," she whispered, her voice soft. "Are you okay?" Richard let out a faint laugh, though it was weak and breathless. I don't know. I feel lighter, like a weight has been taken off my chest. But at the same time, I feel empty. The house, the curse, everything, it's gone. But so is the life I've known. Emily nodded, understanding. The life Richard had led, one filled with guilt, fear, and the constant burden of his family's curse, was now behind him. But so was the purpose that had driven him for so long. There was no more curse to fight, no more pact to break. Now, they had to figure out what life would look like without the shadow of the past looming over them. You don't have to figure it all out right now, Emily said gently. You've carried this for so long. Just breathe. Take some time. We've both been through enough. Richard looked at her, his expression softening. You're right. I've been running from this for so long, trying to find a way to fix it. But now, I don't know what's next. There was a long pause as they both stood in the quiet of the chamber. The darkness that had filled the house was gone, but it was replaced with an uncertain stillness. The mansion no longer felt like a prison, it was just a house that had once held too many secrets, too many memories of pain. But now, those memories were fading, slowly slipping away with the light of dawn that filtered through the cracks in the stone. I think we need to leave this place, Emily said quietly. There's nothing left for us here. Richard didn't answer at first, his gaze drifting to the altar, where the remnants of the pact had once held sway. The scroll, the key, the dark energy, they were all gone now. The house was no longer a prison for the Winthrop family. It was simply a house, empty of the curse that had ruled it for so long. After a long moment, Richard nodded. You're right. It's over. I don't want to stay here anymore. This place will always be part of who I am, but it's time to leave it behind. They walked out of the chamber, their footsteps echoing softly in the now quiet halls. The mansion was vast, and each room felt like a chapter from another life, a life that was no longer theirs. As they moved through the house, Emily noticed the way the light seemed different now. The shadows were softer, the air fresher. It was as though the house itself had been reborn, free from the dark forces that had once held it in their grip. As they made their way through the main floor and toward the front doors, Emily could see the mansion in a new light. It was no longer a place of fear and darkness, but a space waiting to be filled with new memories, new possibilities. They could start fresh, leave the past behind, and build something new. Where do we go from here? Emily asked, looking at Richard. Richard paused in the doorway, his gaze lingering on the mansion one last time. I don't know. I don't think I can go back to the life I had before, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's time to start over together. Emily smiled softly, feeling the warmth of the sun outside spill into the house, filling the space with light. It felt like the first step into a new chapter, not just for Richard, but for both of them. They had been through so much, survived the darkest parts of their lives, and now they had the opportunity to rebuild, to create something for themselves that was free from the shadows of the past. I think I'd like that, Emily said, her voice full of quiet resolve. Together. They stepped out into the light, the mansion receding behind them, a place of memories that would fade with time. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise. As they walked away from the house, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet certainty that they were leaving the past behind. They were free, finally free. But there was one last thing, something that had been nagging at the back of Emily's mind. As they walked through the grounds, toward the car waiting to take them far away from the mansion, Emily turned to Richard. What will happen to the mansion? She asked, her voice uncertain. Richard's eyes flickered toward the estate one last time. I don't know. Maybe it'll stay empty, a place of memories. Maybe someone else will come and make it their own. But it won't be ours anymore. Emily nodded, understanding. The mansion was no longer part of their story. It was a relic of the past, a place where the curse had begun and ended. Now it was just a house that would be left behind, like all the pain and darkness that had once filled it. The future lay ahead of them, wide open and full of possibility. And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt hope, true hope. Not the hope of escaping something dark and terrifying, but the hope of creating something new, something lasting, something that belonged only to them. They were free, and they would build their future together. A new path forward. The sun was setting as Emily and Richard made their way through the estate's grounds, leaving the mansion behind. The once foreboding structure was now distant in their minds, a fading memory in the rearview mirror of the car they were riding in. They hadn't spoken much during the drive, each of them lost in their thoughts, reflecting on the events that had just transpired. They had faced darkness, literal and figurative, and had come out on the other side. But now, it was time for something else. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of clarity. The heavy fog that had clouded her mind for so long was lifting, and she could see the path ahead. It was still uncertain, but it was hers to walk, and Richard's to walk beside her. The world beyond the mansion felt vast and full of opportunities. The future was open to them, free from the chains of the past, and that was something neither of them had ever truly known: freedom. Not like this. As the car took them further away from the mansion, Emily's thoughts turned to Richard. He had paid a heavy price to rid his family of the curse, to free them from the darkness that had haunted them for generations. She still didn't know what the future would hold for him, what life would look like now that his family's dark legacy was behind him. But she knew one thing: he wouldn't be alone. Not anymore. "Richard," Emily said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Her voice was soft, tentative, as if she were testing the waters, unsure of where this conversation might lead. He turned to her, his expression weary but warm. "Yeah?" "I know we've been through so much," she continued, "but I want to make sure you're okay. I want to help you figure out what comes next." Richard smiled faintly, his gaze never leaving the road ahead. "I don't know if I can ever be okay. Not completely, but I'm getting there. It'll take time, but I'm not running from it anymore." Emily felt a swell of affection for him, for his honesty and the quiet strength he had shown in the face of everything. He had carried the weight of his family's curse for years, had made unimaginable sacrifices. Now, as they headed into an uncertain future, he was willing to face it head on. She admired that. "We don't have to figure everything out right away," Emily said, her voice steady. "We can take it one day at a time. Whatever you need, Richard, I'm here." He glanced at her, his smile softening. "Thank you. I didn't think I could ever be free of all of this. And now, I don't know what to do with myself." Emily laughed softly, her heart lightening at his words. "We'll figure it out together." The car ride continued in comfortable silence, the noise of the world outside filling the space between them. The city skyline slowly came into view as they approached the town. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem as daunting as it once had. Later that evening, as they settled into a small, cozy hotel on the outskirts of town, Richard seemed to relax for the first time since they had arrived. The hotel was far removed from the grandeur of the mansion, quiet and unassuming, a place where they could catch their breath and gather their thoughts. It was an ordinary place, but it felt like a sanctuary, something they had never known until now. Emily unpacked her bag, the hum of the overhead lights providing the only sound in the room. Richard had stepped out onto the small balcony to get some fresh air, but she could hear his voice through the open window, low and reflective. "Emily," Richard called from outside, and she stepped toward the balcony, looking at him. "Yeah?" He leaned against the railing, his eyes gazing out at the city lights. "I've been thinking about everything. About my family, about what we went through, And I realized something. I can't keep running from the past. But I can start living for the future. I can start living for me. And for us. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had hoped for this moment, for Richard to let go of the past and embrace what lay ahead. And now, here it was. "That's all I've ever wanted," she said softly. "For you to live for yourself. Not for the family's legacy, not for some curse. Just for you." Richard smiled, his gaze shifting to her. "And for you, Emily. I've never felt this free. But I think I can finally start to see a life without all the weight of what's come before. And I want that life to be with you." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Emily's chest tightened with emotion, and for a moment she felt the weight of everything that had happened, everything they had overcome. The darkness, the curse, the sacrifices, it had all brought them here, to this moment. And she realized that, no matter what the future held, they had made it, together. "I want that too," Emily replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want a life with you, a life that's ours, free." Richard stepped closer, reaching for her hand, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them felt right, full of understanding and a quiet promise for the future. The weight of the past had been lifted, but the future was still a blank canvas, one they would fill together, one day at a time. It was impossible to predict what would come next, but as long as they were together, Emily knew that anything was possible. The darkness was behind them, and now they could walk forward into the light. Later that night, they sat side by side on the balcony, watching the stars twinkle above them. The city stretched out before them, its lights reflecting off the windows, a symbol of the life they had ahead. It felt like a new beginning, a chance to build something real, something meaningful, free from the shadows of the past. "We don't need to have all the answers," Emily said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We just need to keep moving forward." Richard nodded, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. One step at a time. And with that, they sat in the quiet of the night, the world around them calm and still. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt at peace. The journey they had been on was over, but a new one was beginning. And she was ready for it, ready for whatever came next, as long as they were together. The darkness was behind them. The light of a new beginning was ahead. The path ahead. The weeks that followed their departure from the mansion were both a blur and a quiet reflection. Emily and Richard found themselves in an entirely new world, one that was not haunted by shadows or weighed down by centuries of curses. It was a world full of possibility, even if it was unclear where the road ahead would take them. They spent the first few days simply recovering from everything. The journey had been long and difficult, both physically and emotionally, and they needed time to heal. But as the days passed, the weight of the past gradually faded. Richard began to feel the full weight of his decision to leave everything behind. The curse was broken, but there were still remnants of the past he had to confront, not just the mansion, but his entire family history. Emily knew that this would take time. Richard had spent so much of his life in the shadows of his family's legacy, carrying the burden of their choices and the darkness that had followed them. And though he was free of the curse now, there were still things he needed to reckon with, things that could not be erased with the turning of a key or the breaking of a pact. One evening, as they sat on a small, cozy porch outside a cabin they had rented in a quiet town, Richard spoke up. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a golden light over the trees, and the world felt peaceful, something they hadn't experienced in years. "I've been thinking," Richard said, his voice slow and measured, "about my family, about my name, about what it means now. I was always so consumed with the curse, with breaking it. But now that it's done, I'm left wondering who I am without it." Emily turned to him, her gaze soft, understanding. She had always seen the man beneath the weight of the curse, the person who had been living in its shadow for far too long. Now that the curse was gone, Richard was left to rediscover himself. You're more than the curse, Richard, Emily said, her voice firm but gentle. You always were. You're not defined by your family's mistakes or the pact that was made long before you were born. You're free now. You can create your own future. Richard smiled faintly, but it was tinged with sadness. It's not that simple. The past is still a part of me. It always will be. My family is a part of me. Emily nodded, her heart aching for him. She knew how hard it could be to let go of the past, to separate yourself from the weight of your history. But she also knew that Richard had the strength to move forward. They both did. The curse was gone, but the healing process was just beginning. You're right, Emily said after a moment, her voice softer now. Your family is a part of you, but you don't have to carry their burdens anymore. You don't have to live in their shadow. You can decide who you want to be now, and I'll be here to help you figure that out. Richard looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude. Thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me. I don't know where I'd be without you. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. We're in this together, Richard. We always have been. That night they sat in silence, letting the cool evening air settle around them. The world was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time they both felt a sense of calm, a sense of belonging in a place where the past could not follow them. As the days went on, they began to explore their new life. They stayed in small towns, moving from place to place, taking time to truly get to know each other outside of the shadows of the mansion. They had long conversations, quiet moments, and even a few arguments. Nothing was perfect, but they were finally free to build something new. Richard began to focus on the things that had always been important to him, but had been overshadowed by his family's curse. He started writing again, something he hadn't done in years. He had always loved to write, but it had never felt like something he could pursue, trapped as he was under the weight of his family's legacy. Now, with the curse gone, he was able to rediscover his passion for storytelling. It was therapeutic, a way to reclaim the pieces of himself that had been lost in the years of running from the past. Emily, too, found herself changing. She had spent so much of her life as a caretaker, always putting others' needs before her own, always trying to fix things for others. But now, she was learning to take care of herself. She explored new hobbies, rekindled old interests, and focused on her own growth, alongside Richard's. It felt good to finally have space to breathe and be her true self, without the weight of other people's expectations holding her back. One day, as they sat on the porch of their latest rental, a small cottage on a quiet lake, Richard turned to her with a thoughtful expression on his face. "Do you think we'll ever stop running?" he asked quietly, his voice almost hesitant. Emily tilted her head, considering his question. They had been moving from place to place, staying just long enough to catch their breath before moving on. It had been a way for them to escape the ghosts of the past, but now, with the curse gone, it felt different. "I don't think we're running anymore," Emily replied after a long pause. "We've been running from the past for so long, but now we're moving forward. We're building something new, together." Richard's eyes softened, and he smiled a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I like that," he said. "I like the sound of that." As they sat together, the weight of the past seemed to lift further. There would always be echoes of what they had been through, always remnants of the darkness that had shaped them. But they were no longer bound by it. They had broken free, and now they were free to live their lives in whatever way they chose. And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt truly hopeful. The future was still uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. They were no longer defined by their pasts or by the darkness that had haunted them. They were free to create something new, something full of light. Richard reached for her hand, and she squeezed it, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The curse was behind them, the past was behind them, and they were ready to walk forward into the unknown, side by side, together, building the future. As the weeks turned into months, Richard and Emily's new life unfolded before them. They were no longer running from the past. The shadows that had haunted them, that had clung to every corner of their lives were slowly dissipating, replaced by the quiet promise of a future they were building together. They had moved from the quiet cottage by the lake to a small town nestled in the hills, a place far from the grand mansions and the legacy of the Winthrop family. The town was humble, its streets lined with modest houses and quiet shops, a stark contrast to the world Richard had come from. But it felt like the perfect place for them to start fresh. Richard had found work at a local bookstore, his love for writing and storytelling reigniting with every book he shelved and every customer he helped. It wasn't the glamorous life he once thought he had to live, but it was enough. It was his choice, and that was what mattered most. He was no longer weighed down by the expectations of his family, the curse, or the life they had planned for him. He was free to do what he loved, and that was all he needed. Emily had found a job as a therapist at a nearby clinic, helping others who had gone through struggles similar to her own. She had spent years taking care of others, putting their needs before her own, but now she was learning to find balance. She loved the work, loved being able to help people move forward in their lives, just as she had done. But she also made sure to take time for herself. She and Richard spent evenings cooking together, taking walks through the town, and visiting local cafes. They had made a life that was their own, one that was full of ordinary joys, but also a deep sense of fulfillment. The town felt like a small sanctuary, a place where no one knew their past and no one cared. It was a place where they could be themselves, without the weight of history hanging over them. They were simply Richard and Emily, two people who had found each other in the midst of darkness and now stood side by side in the light of a new day. One afternoon, as they sat on their porch, sipping iced tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon, Richard turned to Emily with a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice hesitant but steady. "We've both been through so much to get here, and I'm grateful every day that we found each other. But what comes next? What do we do now?" Emily smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. This was the first time in a long while that Richard had asked this question. They had always been so focused on surviving, on breaking the curse, that they hadn't had the chance to think about what their future would look like once the storm had passed. "I think we're finally ready to ask that question," she replied softly. "And we can take our time figuring it out. We don't need to have all the answers today. But I know one thing, we'll figure it out together." Richard nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. Together. The two of them had come so far, and yet, in this moment, it felt like the beginning. They had stepped out of the shadows of their past and into a life that was full of possibilities. The future was no longer a source of dread, it was something to be embraced, something they could shape with their own hands. Over the next few months, they continued to build their life. Emily started writing a book about her journey, about the challenges she had faced, the lessons she had learned, and the strength she had found within herself. It was cathartic for her, a way to process everything they had been through and to help others who were struggling with their own demons. Richard, too, began working on his own writing, not just as a hobby but as a serious pursuit. He started drafting stories that had been locked away for years, finding peace in the words that flowed from his pen. But even in the midst of all the healing, there were still moments of struggle. Richard had moments when the past would surface, the memories of his family, the darkness of the curse, and he would feel the weight of it all over again. But Emily was there, every step of the way, offering support and understanding, never pushing him to move faster than he was ready. And in those moments, Richard would remind himself that he wasn't alone anymore. He didn't have to carry the burden of his family's sins on his own. Emily, too, had her moments of doubt. There were days when she struggled to fully embrace the freedom she had fought so hard for. She had spent so many years helping others, often losing herself in the process, that it was hard to know how to truly prioritize her own needs. But she was learning, slowly but surely, that taking care of herself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. She was learning to find joy in the small things, in the quiet moments with Richard, in the laughter they shared, in the peaceful life they had built together. It wasn't perfect. There were still days of doubt, days when the weight of their pasts felt heavy. But they were learning to navigate those days, to lean on each other when the world felt too much. They had come so far, and yet, in some ways, it felt like they were just beginning. One evening, as they sat by the fire pit in their backyard, wrapped in blankets with mugs of hot cocoa in hand, Emily turned to Richard with a smile. "You know," she said, "I think we're finally where we're supposed to be." Richard raised an eyebrow, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Are we?" She nodded, her gaze soft but steady. "Yes. This life we're building, it's real. It's ours. And I'm grateful for it every single day." Richard looked at her, his expression filled with warmth. "Me too. I'm glad we're here, together." As they sat there, the night wrapping around them like a comforting blanket, Emily felt a sense of contentment she had never known before. The darkness of their past was finally behind them, and the light of their new beginning was shining brighter than ever. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt a peace that was more than just the absence of fear. It was the quiet certainty that they had created something real, something lasting. They had broken free from the curse, but more importantly, they had found each other. And together, they could face whatever came next. Their future was theirs to shape. A life reclaimed. The passing months in the quiet town brought a sense of normalcy and peace to Richard and Emily's lives. The sense of freedom that came with being untethered from the past was something they both cherished. Every day felt like a small victory, a step further away from the darkness and closer to the life they were slowly but surely building together. Richard's writing was gaining momentum. What had started as scribbles in a notebook had blossomed into fully formed stories. They weren't just stories about ghosts or curses or haunted mansions, but about people, real, raw, flawed people. He wrote about loss and healing, about love found in unexpected places. His pen had become his way of reclaiming his voice, a voice that had been buried beneath years of family expectations and fear. He was telling his own story now, not as the cursed heir to a powerful family, but as Richard Winthrop, a man who had survived and emerged stronger. Emily's writing, too, was thriving. Her book was beginning to take shape. It was more than just a personal account of overcoming darkness. It was a guide to others, a letter of hope for anyone who felt trapped by their circumstances. She had always been someone who put others first, who gave of herself to help those around her. But now she was helping herself, finding her own path in the world, and in doing so, she was inspiring others to do the same. It was clear that they were both on a journey of rediscovery, of finding out who they were beyond the stories that had defined them for so long. They had been defined by the curse, by their families, by what had been done to them. But now they were shaping their lives with their own hands, not bound by anyone's expectations. One afternoon, as Emily sat on the porch writing, Richard came out with a smile on his face, holding a letter in his hand. It was from the publisher of the small independent press they had submitted Emily's manuscript to. Emily looked up, her heart fluttering nervously as she put her pen down. "What's this?" she asked, trying to hide her excitement. Richard handed her the letter, his grin widening. "You're not going to believe it." Emily's hands shook as she opened the letter, her eyes scanning the words quickly. When she finished, her breath caught in her throat. "They want to publish it," she exclaimed, her voice full of disbelief and joy. "They want to publish my book, Richard." Richard laughed, a sound full of pride. "I knew it. I knew they would love it. You've put so much of yourself into it, Emily. You've created something beautiful." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, her heart full. This was it. This was what she had been working toward for so long. She had written a book that could help others, that could inspire others to break free from their own pasts. She had taken the first step in reclaiming her own voice, and now it was about to be shared with the world. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You were there for me every step of the way." Richard stepped forward and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We did this together, Emily. You were the one who took the leap. You're the one who chose to trust yourself." In that moment, Emily realized just how far they had come. They had both chosen to trust themselves, to move forward, to create a life that was truly theirs. No longer defined by the curse, no longer defined by the past, they were making their own story now. And then Richard spoke again, this time with a quiet intensity. "I'm proud of you, Emily. I'm proud of everything you've done. I know it hasn't been easy, but you've found your way. And now it's my turn." Emily looked at him, confused for a moment. "What do you mean?" Richard smiled, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "I've been thinking. I've been writing. But there's something else I've always wanted to do. Something I've never had the courage to try, because I was so caught up in what I should do. But now I think it's time." Emily tilted her head, intrigued. "What is it?" Richard took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I want to open a small bookshop, a place for people to find stories, to escape, to connect. It's not a huge business venture, and I'm not going to become rich from it, but I've always loved the idea of creating a space for people to experience something meaningful. A place where they can come together, share stories, and feel like they belong. I don't want to be stuck in the shadows anymore, wondering what might have been." Emily's heart swelled with pride for him. He was finally stepping into his own, taking the risks that had always seemed too big, too impossible. But now, in the light of the new life they had built, Richard was no longer afraid to follow his heart. "That sounds incredible," Emily said, her voice full of admiration. "You've always had a way with words. A bookshop is a perfect place for you to share that." Richard's smile deepened. "I know it's a big step, but I feel like it's something I'm meant to do. I want to create a space where people can find not just books, but a sense of peace, a place where they don't have to be defined by their past, just like we're not anymore." They spent the next few days planning. They searched for a small storefront in the town, one that had character but wasn't too big. They envisioned it together, rows of bookshelves, cozy reading corners, a coffee nook where people could sit and relax. The bookshop would be more than just a place to buy books. It would be a haven, a space for healing, for discovery, for connection. Emily could see it all in her mind, a tangible dream taking shape. She would help him with the design, with the atmosphere. They would create something together, a shared project that was rooted in the new life they had built. The excitement they felt was palpable. It wasn't just the promise of a new venture, it was the realization that they were creating something real, something that belonged to them. They weren't running anymore. They had found their place in the world, and now they were building a future that was grounded in the lessons of the past, but shaped by their own choices. For the first time, neither of them felt burdened by their histories. They had faced their darkest moments and had come out the other side. They were no longer haunted by the curse of the past. They were free to live, to dream, to build. And together, they were doing just that. As the last of the whispering faded, the house fell into an unsettling silence. The feeling of unease lingered, but now there was clarity. It was as though the answers had always been just out of reach, and now they were finally there, in the air, waiting to be understood. But what did it all mean? Sometimes, the truth isn't as terrifying as we imagine. Sometimes, it's the quiet moments after the storm that help us find peace. You see, life isn't always about running from our fears. Sometimes, it's about facing them, understanding them, and moving forward with a sense of calm. So, wherever you are right now, remember this. The fear you feel today isn't something that will last forever. Just like that house, your fears will eventually fade. What matters is how you respond, how you choose to move forward. You have more strength than you realize. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to Stories TH. Share where you're watching from and let me know your thoughts on the story. Until next time, take a deep breath, relax, and remember, you are never as alone as you think.